This is going to be a special night. We're going to let folks kind of trickle in for a minute or two, but I'm going to tell you, you are in for a treat. We've got Sharletta Evans, who is really a national treasure, a hero of mine, an incredible friend of RAWtools. These faith forums we have been doing periodically. We try to hit them up every month or two, and we've talked about all kinds of different things. The whole goal of these faith forums is to connect our faith to the real issues in our world. And we've talked about immigration, abortion, policing, the environment. We've run through many of them, and we've also talked about gun violence and the death penalty. And Miss Sharletta Evans, who you're going to hear from, it lives at the intersection of many of those things. But this is special tonight because instead of just talking about a big issue of injustice, we're framing it around restorative justice, right? To think about not just the stuff that's wrong, but what are some better models that can heal the wounds of violence in the world? And I can't imagine anybody to have that conversation with better than Mike Martin and Sharletta Evans. So as folks trickle in, let me just tell you a couple of things. First of all, many of you have been joining us for our book clubs, and we've been this month, by the way, this month is Gun Violence Prevention Month. That's why I'm wearing my orange. We've been wearing orange this month. That we might. And you can get these Blessed Are the Peacemakers for the Children of God shirt. You can get them on Red Letter Christians or at RAWtools. You can wear them beyond June as well. But that message is out there. And we've been doing our book club. We've done a whole bunch of different things around gun violence this month. And it's also the anniversary of the Emanuel AME shooting in Charleston. And so this is our book for the month of June, For Such a Time as This, by Reverend Sharon Richter. She'll be with me on Sunday. It's going to be a powerful conversation. And this is it's a powerful read, but it's not too long. So it's not too late to get her book and read over it. And even if you don't have the book, join us on Sunday night. It's going to be incredible. And then we're doing morning prayer on the first day of every month. So July 1st, we're gonna have morning prayer. Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove and I will be hosting, but we'll have a special guest, Robbie Jones, who is a scholar and an expert on the trend of Christian nationalism. So y'all, we're watching these January 6th things happening, and this is an incredible conversation we're going to have. We're going to pray together. Lord knows we need to pray together for our country on July 1st, but it's also very near to July 4th. So there's no coincidence there that we're talking about Christian nationalism and what's, the kind of crisis of Christian nationalism in our country. So now tonight's conversation is, but really we don't need too many chefs in the kitchen. So I'm gonna dip out soon, but I want to first bring in Mike Martin, who most of y'all know Mike. A lot of you know Sharletta Evans as well, but Mike and I wrote Beating Guns together. He's the founder of RAWtools, and you've been really busy this month, Mike. So I thought first, before we dive into everything, tell folks what you've been up to with the Broncos and all the the gun buybacks and chopping guns all month. Tell us about it, man.
Yeah, we partnered with Sharletta too, with the cities of Denver, Colorado, and Aurora, Colorado, part of the two big cities in the Denver metro area, for 8 buybacks this year, starting in March, going through October. We've also been doing sister events where we turn some of those guns into garden tools, and hear from Sharletta and other people within her network, the Colorado Crime Survivors Network, which she co-founded or founded here in Colorado. So we've been busy cutting up firearms. Our national network has also been busy cutting up firearms since the shootings in Buffalo, Uvalde, Tulsa, and et cetera. They just keep happening. So we've kind of had an explosion, not just in gun donations, but also in people wanting to help cut up those firearms. And we always try and connect those events of cutting up the firearms to the people like Sharletta, who's been directly impacted by gun violence.
Yeah, and you chopped somebody up. You had to go get checked on by the doctor because you're dehydrated, huh? I just threw you under the bus right there.
that I need to practice self-care a little better, I think.
So I'll let you introduce Sharletta, because she's been a core part of this whole movement with RAWtools and also gun violence. But bigger than that, Sharletta, you're an amazing example of how we can use our wounds to kind of heal the wounds of the world. So I'm so glad that you could do this with us. I'm going to dip out and let Mike kind of officially welcome you, and I'm excited for the conversation. Make sure y'all put comments or questions in the chat. We're watching the live streams on Facebook and YouTube and other places. So if you have a question or a thought, make sure you share it there. So Mike, Sharletta, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Red Letter Christians and Katie behind the scenes too, doing some work here. So I want to kind of frame all of this. If we go back about just over 9 years, 10 years ago, Sharletta just celebrated 10 years of her dialogue, her high-risk victim offender, or what was now called high-impact dialogue. And right before that, I was a youth pastor, and our church was hosting Restorative Justice conference for kind of the Colorado area, Colorado Springs area, where I'm located. And it was right after Sharletta had this amazing dialogue. It was the first high impact dialogue in the state of Colorado. And high impact means it's a level above. Significant harm has been done, usually violence, often gun violence, that's involved here. And in this case, I'm going to let her tell her story specifically, but she experienced a loss to gun violence. And so it was a major impact, something that a lot of people were working on to allow restorative justice to take place within our current legal system, and try and create another path for people to find healing who've experienced significant trauma, significant loss, and really oftentimes out of nowhere, something that no one really planned for. So Sharletta, thank you so much for being here. Hearing your story has added that piece that RAWtools needed to returning guns into garden tools. That's wonderful, but also this path of restorative justice really helps kind of bring that whole idea of turning swords into plowshares on the hard work. I tell people often that doing the work of turning guns into garden tools is easy when you compare it to the work that you've done with restoring not just your life, but so many other people in your family who were impacted by the loss of Casson. So if you could, Sharletta, you always love to be introduced as Casson's mom. You're also Calvin's mom, and soon we're here, Raymond's as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself, some of the things it's not just Colorado Crime Survivors Network, but tell us about some of the other work you're currently doing here in Colorado.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Thank you for informing me of the work that Shane is doing. I'm always welcome to, excited to be in you all's midst. I think we set out there and we did the documentary and we did the book, and so I was able to share my story in the documentary as well as in the book. And so that's my first introduction to Shane. And then just really coming in on it, like I said, maybe we're looking at maybe like 7 years ago, I believe, anywhere between 5 to 7 years ago is when I met Shane. And when I did my first, it was at the Restorative Justice Summit there in Colorado Springs, what you're speaking of. That was probably my first big event ever speaking at, sharing my story and on my journey, Casson's story. The work that I've been pretty much catapulted in doing legislation and being instrumental with changing the laws nationally with at the U.S. Supreme Court level, working with the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth in D.C., doing a lot of that legislative work, lobbying on the Hill when it came to Miller and Graham, changing the laws for the juvenile lifers to where we were able to be instrumental with that. Also with Louisiana, we were able to change the laws there. So we pretty much being instrumental nationally to affect the lives of juveniles that have been sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, being able to change that and then impact it locally here in the state of Colorado, to where we have now anywhere from 12 to 15 juvenile lifers that have been resentenced based on that national work. Also being doing the work with the Colorado Crime Survivor, doing the work of Colorado Crime Survivors Network. We have our two flagship programs, which is 5280 Survivors, moms and dads that have lost children to violence. We're heavily involved with legislation. We were able to work right along with ACLU, Equal Justice USA, and abolish the death penalty here in the state of Colorado. That was in 2020, March of 2020. It was signed out of law by the governor, to where we were able to abolish that. We had over 70 signatures of victim families that did not agree with the death penalty. So we did that work, boots on the ground, and made it happen, to where the right voices was in the room to change that trajectory of the death penalty here in the state. So it was a great feat, and we so proud about it. And probably 7 days after that, 3 men was removed off of death row and shifted to a life in prison without the possibility of parole. So we had 3 young men that sit on death row for over oh my goodness, more than 2 decades, that was sitting on death row. And so that was monumentous. So also we have the PYGD, which is our Put Your Gun Down. That's with our kids that we're dealing directly with complex traumatic grief, as well as just pretty much the traumas that our youth have faced. So that's some of the work. Constantly, the Colorado Crime Survivors Network is constantly networking, as we have done with RAWtools and ACLU of Colorado, and just doing the work. Legislative work is what's really needed, and so that's what we do. And there's just countless of bills we've been a part of, being instrumental with the change here that affects the grassroots organizations, that we can actually get some work done.
Yeah, and you also have, I think, connected with the Put Your Gun Down campaign, the HIP program, Handgun Intervention Program, with system that involves youth and young adults as well. So you've got your hands in so many different levels of gun violence prevention, but also postvention, really important work, so we can break those cycles of violence. So to start kind of digging into restorative justice, how did you learn about it? Because you were the first person to do this high impact dialogue. Can you talk a little bit about how it was brought to your attention? Because it's even still, it's often a hard service to find out about as someone who is defined as a victim in the current legal system.
Yes, I was introduced to restorative justice when so let me share my journey that led us to this particular event. So it's been 26 years. I lost my 3-year-old son to a drive-by shooting by the hand of teenagers. It's been 26 years ago. Actually, this coming December will be 27 years. My son, Casson Xavier Evans, 3 years old, life was taken. And being a Christian and being a strong believer, I was impacted by the Holy Spirit to really bring on a miracle of grace, of forgiveness. And it was an instantaneous work in my spirit and in my heart. And with that taking place, it put me in a position to be able to focus on my healing and healing well as my surviving son. I will get into some of the detail about that once I talk about that restorative justice piece. So because I had come into a place of forgiveness, I would say instantaneously, I was approached by several people talking about restorative justice. Well, when I first heard about it, I really wasn't interested because I was yet going through my healing process. Years later, I just began to remember about this. I had done all of my self-care. I had to confront it, all of the hard things about my healing, the 6 stages of grief, and walking through those processes. And I felt like there was something missing. So I went after the person that told me about restorative justice, and that was in 2009. So I began to talk to them about can I do? It hadn't been unheard of here in Colorado concerning the high risk dialogue. And like you said, it's now considered high impact. But at the time in 2009, it was high risk victim and offender dialogue. And it hadn't been heard of. And so it kind of coined that name because of the fact that there was homicide involved. And that's where it became the high risk and fully something that we had to use every safety measure to make it possible here in the state. So there was a work that went forward due to the request that I wanted to see the person that caused me harm, that I wanted to go face to face with that person. And so we began to do the work. So connecting with now Senator Pete Lee and Lynn Lee, which are the gurus here in Colorado, someone that you can call on, someone that knows restorative justice ins and outs. But the fact that we were doing it high risk, it was new to all of us. It was new to me as a victim family, to those that have experienced restorative justice dialogue for misdemeanors, school, workplace. It was all new to confront this high risk. And so that was my exposure to learning. And it took us 3 years to do the work to pretty much convince the Department of Corrections that this was something that was needed. So that's when I began to do legislative work. At the time, Pete Lee was practicing law, and he became a state representative at the time. Once he became a state representative, he drafted a bill. I testified on the bill at the House, at the Senate. We were able to get that bill through. Restorative justice became law in 2012. And that's what opened the door for a pilot program. When the pilot program came about, it was 2011 when the bill actually was signed into law. 2012, we were actually able to say, let's set a date. I was considered the person that they wanted to utilize for the first high risk victim and offender dialogue. And the young man that had caused me harm was considered a model prisoner, that he qualified for that dialogue, which he was accountable, remorseful, and had a willingness to repair the harm. So we went over a 6 months prep, which is called a pre-conferencing. So we prepared and went over with a fine-tooth comb for safety purposes, hence high risk. So that is how I pretty much found out about it. We did the work. As a victim family, I began to use my voice and realize the power that I possess to produce change. And that's when restorative justice became law here in the state.
I wonder if we can back up and you can talk about what happened to your son, Casson, and then we can kind of get back into a little bit more of the prep process and what it was like entering that room for the first time. So walk us through what happened in December there in the late 90s.
Yes, thank you, Mike. So December 21st, 1995, we were preparing for Christmas. Here we are 4 days before Christmas and 3 days before my surviving son's birthday. We were heading down to the Park Hill area. I grew up in Aurora, lived in Aurora. When I was an adult, I still remained in Aurora, Colorado. We were called down to a residence down in Park Hill, the Denver area of Colorado, because there was a report of a drive-by shooting the night before. And my relatives called me to come to their safety, to rescue them from this violence that had pretty much stemmed from a lot of gang activity here in Colorado that trickled in from California, where there were a lot of gang activity, and it was coined the Summer of Violence. And that was in 1992. This was the tail end of it. 1995, they had already put in laws that they were going to lock up any child that was involved with gangs that had committed a homicide. And so when we went down to Park Hill area, we were caught in the midst of a shooting, another drive-by, the same ones that were there the night before returned. We were caught in the middle of that drive-by. 21 bullets were fired, 7 to the duplex that we sat in front of, and 14 to the car that my boys were in and other relatives. I had went down to pick up a great niece, which was 3 years old, same age as my Casson. The car was riddled with bullets. Casson, Xavier Evans, nicknamed Biscuit, his life was taken that night by one of those bullets that entered into that vehicle. I was currently in the home picking up my niece when the shots began to ring out. Once we left the home, jumping in the car, 2 blocks later is when we realized Casson had been injured, not knowing the severity of the injury. And the paramedics came to where we were, and they hoisted, Casson off to care for. Right before the paramedics came, Casson took his last breath in my arms. When I looked down on my clothing, I was covered. He had bled out all over me. I had no idea that was taking place at the time. They took his little body on, and they were looking to revive him. At that time, their paramedics took him, and then my surviving son was there, not knowing what traumas he experienced being right next to his brother when he was shot. He was 6 years old, getting ready to turn 7 Christmas Eve. And pretty much that night was it was one of those things to where it was just in disbelief that this had all just happened. And we were taken to the police department. My family came. They took my surviving son with them. The police department took us down and questioned us, and they knew something that we did not, and that was they were not able to revive Casson. And they gave me the report that Casson did not make it. So once we were sitting there, I really experienced a divine strength that came over me, not really knowing that's what it was, but I could hear my niece crying out at the police station that Casson's gone. And I really felt a strength come over me that I had to get to her. Once we left the police station and went to the hospital, all the walls were covered with friends and family. And they were looking at me, and they said that my face was just aglow. And they were wondering, did I even know that Casson was gone because of my countenance and my appearance? And they found out that I did know that Casson was gone. And leaving the hospital, I experienced a supernatural experience. I went into the restroom to find myself and to gather my thoughts. I was in agony. I could not believe that this had just taken place. And so the only place that I could go was to the restroom to get away from everyone. When I went into the restroom, I sat there and I just began to ask God, has this really just happened? And I could hear my mother praying in the other room to dispatch angels. You know, we're real Pentecostal. We believe in the work of angels. And so I could hear my mother saying, dispatch your angels, find out who killed my baby. And I remember saying in response to that, it doesn't matter to me who killed him. Is he really gone? And I could feel myself moaning in agony on the inside of me. All of a sudden, I hear a voice and I felt a presence. And this voice was a suggestion and a question at the same time. And the voice spoke and said, will you forgive? As if to say, have you considered forgiving? And I was like, God, is that you talking? Of course I'll forgive. I was really, not knowing what this was all about, or I heard the voice on the inside of me and I felt a presence, and it was, will you forgive? Have you considered forgiving? I sit there, I said, yes. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what was that all about? How these people must be horrible people that took my son's life. If God is asking me to forgive when we know nothing about who had done this crime, who had done the shooting, we knew nothing. And I said, yes, I'll forgive. And at that moment, I remember leaving the restroom and I was able to rest that night. And I remember seeing a vision of Casson in that home that I was at where he took the last breath. And he was at the ceiling in the corner. And I saw a vision. It wasn't a dream, it was actual vision. And Casson was saying to me, Mommy, here I am. I'm up here, Mommy, here I am. So that was a peace that came over me that night where I could rest. He was letting me know he's still yet alive, even though his physical body was absent. The next morning, the news came. The news reporter came and asked me, did we know anything about who had committed this crime? I said, we have not heard from anyone. The district attorneys has not called us. No one knows who done this. It was pretty much a community uproar and search about who had done this crime. No one had heard anything as of yet. I told him, but one thing I do know is that I have forgiven. And he's saying, what do you mean you forgive? I thought you said you hadn't heard from anyone. I said, exactly. Only thing I know is that I have a peace and I have forgiven. And it went on the front page of the news at that time. Mother of slain toddler forgives and no one has been apprehended. From that point on was when my healing began, when I said yes to that offer of forgiveness. Have you considered forgiving? Will you forgive? And because I had already been conditioned in my faith, because I had 3 years of relationship building with the Father. When I gave birth to Casson is when I gave my life to Christ. And it had been 3 years. I was doing missionary work. We were doing drug and alcohol support groups, and I had pretty much connected my relationship. So when that question came to me, I was prepared to say yes. So these things does not happen overnight to say yes to forgiveness, but you hear the voice of the Father, and I think you need to respond properly. Yes.
Yeah. And, as someone who hearing your story and then dove into restorative justice and getting training, one of the things they talk about is you never require forgiveness as part of restorative justice. It's just not appropriate. And yet
Yes.
it's this organic thing that happens as a part of the process, whether it's almost instant, like your experience, or other people, like if you read Reverend Risher's book, for instance, talks about how she knows that's the path she's on, but we all have our different kind of timetable to that, right? Like we all have our path that needs to respect our grief, and we get there and we move there. But there's something unique about the restorative justice process that puts two people together that have been connected by this trauma, and asks them to work together to help heal or make amends for that. And forgiveness often becomes a part of that, whether it's two Christians or not, or two people of faith or not. That it's almost like this thing that's not in the ingredients but still gets baked in. So I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, and this whole kind of legal prep process, you mentioned it there, a little bit about how these people must have been horrible who did this to my son. There's kind of this also parallel track of the current legal system or traditional legal system and restorative justice alongside that. Can you speak a little bit about how the person or the people who did this were painted by the justice system to you, and then your experience in the courtroom with Raymond especially?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, we have a system that, which I knew nothing of this. I learned this throughout my process of going through the court proceedings. And, the district attorneys, they had already coined all of these gang members, all of these juveniles as the worst of the worst. And so when we found out 3 days later that these were kids that had access to guns, two 15-year-olds and a 16-year-old that had broken a home, stole a car, stole guns, and was out shooting. This was unheard of in my life. I was just taken back to know that children had access to guns. And it was horrible and awful. It almost surprised me just as much as the fact that Casson was gone, the fact that there was guns in the hands of kids. Then the fact that once they were apprehended, the district attorneys had let me know they want to use the main shooter. So we have 3 kids. They want to use the main shooter as an example, send him away for life. Also, the co-defendant in the shooting, and also the driver, who he didn't have access to guns. He was not shooting, but he was the driver. So painting that picture that he was a monster, that he was the worst, that he was this notorious gang member that was leader of the pack of all these other kids, the main shooter they're speaking of, and that they want to use him as an example so they can deter this gang activity. And so pretty much when my thoughts and the things that I was thinking about these kids were like, they were literally monsters. They were someone that needed to be put away before they cause harm to anyone else. And so when I there was things that transpired between the time of apprehending the kids. They got the kids in custody, and then they began to filter out who actually killed Casson. And they had done all this work, and then when they called me in, they had already come to that conclusion of what had happened. And now we have charges against the kids: homicide, child abuse, all these different charges. The main shooter received about 9 charges to his case. And now we have 3 trials we're ready to face. In the process of this we were called upon. Now, this is Christmas. This is December 21st, 1995. So now we have Calvin's birthday, my surviving son, Calvin. His birthday's the 24th, a day before Christmas. So we had birthday we had to do. Then we had Christmas we had to do. Then we had to bury Casson on the 28th of December. So we have all of this work that we're getting done. And thank God for the supernatural strength that he imparted upon me and in me to be able to navigate through these things. I could not tell you to this day how it happened, but it actually took place that I was able to perform these things. Right after that, now we're going into 1996. The beginning of 1996, there was a pretrial hearing. Keep in mind, the same night that Casson was killed is when I received that visitation and that voice. It happened near midnight that same night that Casson was killed, which was December 21st, 1995. When I went to the pretrial hearing, I walked into the courtroom and I looked across the courtroom, and there stood the main shooter, the boy that killed Casson. And when I looked at him, I could not believe my eyes that he was a baby. He sat there shackled in an orange suit. And when he turned around to me, it was his chest opened up. I experienced another vision. And in this vision, it was as if his chest opened up and I could see inside of him. And I was able to witness his heart that was full of compassion, and that it was not this wicked, cruel, harsh person, the picture that they painted. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't know if it was compassion coming from me or coming from him. But when I looked at him, all I could do is say, wow, he's not who they said he was. That was my thoughts. Retrospect, when that happened, we were knitted together spiritually at that particular point. And it was my confirmation of forgiveness. So I was looking at this young man through the eyes of Christ, who he really was from the eyes of God and not man, and who his heart was already held by God. And this boy was not who they say he was. And as I said, retrospect, we were knitted together spiritually when I witnessed who he really was. Walking away from that, you know, when you have these experiences and they're supernatural and they're divine, you don't really understand them at the time. And so walking through that process of knowing that one thing that I knew, that I had a glory cloud upon me and that I was equipped to go through these trials and to deal with every matter that was coming forward, as well as healing well. So I was equipped to heal well, as well as go through the process of the trials, be present for my surviving son, and knowing that I had to embrace all of the stages of grief in spite of the pain that I was going through. So it was definitely something that not having to deal with hostility, resentment, hate, bitterness, that forgiveness had put me in a position to where I didn't have those thoughts within my heart or my mind.
Yeah, and I know we're trying to squeeze like 25 years of this whole, because this really is a 25-year experience for you. It's not just the night it happened or the night you had this dialogue, but there's a whole lot of experiences that happened along this way. And so as we think about kind of these last 10 minutes or so before we close up, let's talk about the day of the dialogue and your experience with that. a card you had received before that. Because you've gone through these pre-conferencing, right? You and the shooter had you have two different facilitators that were present there, and each one was doing pre-conferencing with you both, prepping what are the questions you want to ask, how are you going to respond if she asks this. So like you said, with a fine-tooth comb, both of you are prepped for everything, all the detailed questions. And you've said before it was like an 8 or 9 hour session. So take us through that 8 or 9 hours in about, that 8 to 10 minutes that we have here, and then
Okay.
we'll ask you a little bit more shorthanded questions after that.
Okay, Mike. Okay, certainly. So here we are, fast forwarding, and 2012, where we have the pilot, the pre-con process, and the 23rd, 2012. There we are at the Lyman Correctional Facility. I have my support people there. Raymond has his support person there. And my surviving son is also present. He's 23 years old. He went through the pre-conferencing as well, Calvin Hurd. And we're there, and we walk into, my request was being victim initiated. That means that I'm the one that's going to initiate everything that takes place. So I wanted to walk into a room where he sat versus him walking into a room where I sat. So it's down to the detail. So when we walk into the room, or heading into the room where he's sitting, Calvin is on my right and Lynn Lee is on my left, the facilitator. I froze at the door. When I looked inside, I was scared to go in. I was stuck right at the front door of this room. There he sat with one another, our facilitators, his support person, and there were 6 of us all together at this table. I had requested to have a table between us, not an open circle, because of the feeling that was too up close and personal for me at the time. So we had a full table, and I froze at the door. When I looked in, this gentleman, Raymond Johnson, now he was 32 years old. He stood up and dropped his head. When he stood up, that was a respect that I felt he was giving to me. When he dropped his head, that was a understanding of the pain that I caused this woman, that she cannot walk through this door. So with those two things happening simultaneously, it gave me the strength I needed to move. So I was receiving of his respect and his honor toward me, that he understood the pain. And that's what gave me the movement. As I sat down, it was my call to start out. I introduced myself, and then we prayed. I prayed, and then he prayed in Aramaic. He's practicing Islam, and he prayed Aramaic prayer and Abrahamic prayer, excuse me. And so at that point, the first thing that came out of his mouth was, I messed up. He grabbed his chest and he said, the only thing that I'm worried about this moment is having a heart attack. He began to cry uncontrollably. In the midst of him crying uncontrollably, keep in mind that throughout these years that had been going, I had I was knitted to him to where I cared about his well-being. I had empathy for this young man. And when he began to cry, my first instinct was to reach out and to hold his hand, but I had to stop myself from doing that and allow him to feel everything he needed to feel. We went through an 8-hour dialogue. We had 2 breaks. And when we did our first break, when he came back, I told him, I said, do you remember? And we began to talk about, so there was 3 things that I wanted him to know. I wanted him to know all about Casson. I wanted him to know the harm that he caused me and the family and the community. And then I wanted him to know where forgiveness comes from, what it looks like, and how that transpired. So those are the things that I wanted to tell him the most. And that's what I began to talk about. he began to share all about his life, and I had heard these things, what had happened. So a lot of what he had told me, I had already heard it. I knew he was being totally transparent and authentic. Also, I asked him, "Do you remember the card you sent me in 2009?" He'd sent me a Mother's Day card via church family. It got to me. The card got to my home, and through letters after letters, it ended up at my home in my hand. It was a Mother's Day card with 3 character reference letters in it. In this Mother's Day card, Raymond asked me, would I help him? And he asked me, would I be a part of his family? Would I be his mother? At the time he wrote me that card, I was just in the process of requesting that restorative justice dialogue. Also, I submitted a letter to the governor for his clemency packet at the same time, right when he had sent me that card. So I was in the process of working toward my healing, on having that dialogue that didn't transpire till 2012. And he said, yes, I remember that. And I said, I could not answer you then at the time. I was not ready. But right now, my answer to you, me being your mother, I will say yes to that. I will be your mother. I will be a part of your family. And my surviving son, he sat there and told him that I'm not here for forgiveness, but I'm here to see if you're authentic. And now that I see that you are, I accept you as my brother. So that was my miracle, to hear my son say these things. And we accepted Raymond 10 years ago, May 23rd, that just passed. We accepted him in our family, my son, Calvin's brother, and we took him under our wing and we supported him the whole time. And like I said, that was when the legislation started nationally. I began to advocate for Raymond Johnson for his release. He was sentenced to life without parole, never to see the light of day. That work that I was initiated in DC, I was there for him and the co-defendant to make an impact on those laws. And due to those laws passing, it affected the laws nationally for juvenile lifers. And testifying at their hearing locally, Raymond Johnson has been released, hallelujah, for 7 months. He is actively my son. He comes and takes my trash out. He comes and eats dinner, and him and Calvin come over and we have dinner. We take pictures and all that kind of cool stuff. We just had our 10-year anniversary for the dialogue that we had. And I tell you, it was refreshing and was reviving, and work accomplished. I testified at the hearing locally for his resentencing, as well as Paul Littlejohn, the other co-defendant, and he will be out this year, the co-defendant. I had a dialogue with him September 30th, 2016, and that was a 4-hour dialogue. So yeah, so 4 hours and 8 hours with Raymond Johnson.
Yeah, I mean,
I got the Holy Spirit moving up in here. I'm having a hard time sitting still over here, Miss Sharletta. Woo! Glory.
Oh, glory. Yes, yes. To God be the glory for the things he has done. Yes, sir. Yes.
and just to kind of wrap this up, I was fortunate enough to be at that 10th anniversary dinner that you had with Calvin and Raymond, sharing all 3 of yours experience about that day 10 years ago. And not only that, but the night was emceed by another formerly incarcerated man who was released because of the work that you did on behalf of Raymond. So, and it wasn't just Jason. There's so many other people that in Colorado that are starting to get released, 1 or 2 over a year over the last few years. And there's more to come through what's called the JCAP process, and going through the folks the juveniles who were sentenced to life without parole as kids many of them under the age of 17, who are now coming out. And I know Raymond has often asked you, like, are they thanking you? Because this is all, like, what's he really wants them to be, they should be coming taking out your trash too, right? Like they should
That's
be,
right.
they should all be around.
That's the
And
way
so,
Raymond feels. He's like, where are they? They need to be here.
yeah, I think and I just really want to make sure that people understand the scope of the work that you have done, not just in your story, but right, your national work, your state work, but also the impact you have on these. I think it's almost a dozen now. You might have a number on that have been released, who were sentenced, in that 80s, 90s, early 2000s time. And you're also, there's some other folks, other mothers who have taken them under their wing as well, Peggy and some others, and it's all a testament to not only the power that you have, but this restorative justice process that you have really kind of given yourself to. So thank you for the example that you have given us. Thank you for the work you have done. Thank you for the impact you've had on RAWtools. It's hard for me to make a decision in RAWtools without thinking, well, like it's the WWSS. What would Sharletta say? What would Sharletta say? And I mean, we even had a call this morning about something else going on, and it was all about what would Sharletta say? What do I need to add? I need to see Sharletta's lens through here to help us make these decisions. So thank you so much for everything that you've done for yourself, for your community, for your other, for Calvin, and for sharing your story here with us tonight. And I think Shane has some questions that came in here too through the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think we almost got to just sit with that. It was so powerful, Miss Sharletta. And on some of these faith forums, we've had 6 or 8 different panelists sharing things, but tonight I had the feeling, I still got the chill bumps on my arm. I was like, I think we don't need too much. We just need to hear, your heart. And oh, I'm so grateful. One of the questions that came up, which I think is a really good one, is this is so powerful to hear. Is this exceptional? Like, is this just happening, in Colorado or your work? Are there other folks doing this in other places in the country? And how might people know about it so they can support it?
Yes, most definitely. I mean, my experience is phenomenal, supernatural, all of those great things. And Mike mentioned earlier that forgiveness is not one of the requirements for restorative justice, but it always seems to come into the ingredients of it. And I believe that's because it's such God's work. The restorative justice, the repairing, the fact that you're confronting your pain and there's someone that is remorseful about it and the willingness to repair the harm, it's the Lord's work. And I think, it's a national work. There's a National Restorative Justice Council. Colorado has our local, our state Restorative Justice Council. We have the work that I do is our restorative justice enthusiasts, or that's where I do my trainings. And Pikes Peak Restorative Justice Council. So yeah, it's broad.
Put any links in the chat there, Mike and Sharletta. Yeah. We'll put them in there, and we'll put them on Facebook and in the notes from this too. Go ahead, Ms.
Yes.
Sharletta.
Yeah. So there is, it's a national work. Matter of fact, they're going to be in St. Louis this year. And so they do a national restorative justice conference every 2 years. And so last year we were here, I believe it was 2019. I was one of the keynote speakers at the National Restorative Justice Council in 19. So now they're, like I said, they'll be in St. Louis. I won't be attending this year, but definitely you can look that up.
That's great.
Yeah, and so it's and then Howard Zier is our our the guy. So so that's definitely, you start right there, and it'll just branch off on the work for restorative justice in our country. Mhm.
That's great. It's a great start, and we cite some of that work in our book too. And a few folks were asking what book we were talking about. That Sharletta's stories in here. In fact, it's on Red Letter Christian's website today. Just the brief excerpt, but y'all got to hear it tonight. And make sure you share this link as it goes out so other people can be inspired by Miss Sharletta's story. Mike, I wanted to see, Howard, Zare, and other folks, they define restorative justice as, that the criminal justice system is asking what did they do wrong and what punishment did they deserve. And restorative justice is asking a different set of questions, is what harm was done and how do we heal those wounds, right? And
absolutely.
Tell us more, Mike, a few other resources that you have, because you've done a whole lot to try to resource people with different things. It's a little hard to see. I hold it close.
Yeah. Let me unblur my video here.
We got it there. Yeah, just hold it up a little bit. There you go. Yeah.
So this is a really good introduction, a little book of restorative teaching tools. There's a lot of kind of this little book series that talk a lot about different aspects, and it's written by a lot of different people. Howard Zare is one of them who has written it out of Eastern Mennonite University. And there's also a deep indigenous history that really informs so much of this. It really comes out of a lot of the dialogue circles and talking pieces that people use in, whether it's a high risk or high impact, like Sharletta was a part of, or part of like a school system where it's slowly moving into public school systems as a way to just have healthy dialogue, whether or not there's conflict there. And then once you have that healthy dialogue, if conflict happens, then you have this model to help work through that, except you have the topic of repairing harm that's a part of it, instead of like a themed dialogue circle. So there's a lot of different places. Howard Zare is a great person. Then Sharletta already mentioned the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice. They're meeting in 3 weeks. I don't think it's too late to register if you really want to, in Chicago. I just checked their website there.
Chicago. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was in St. Louis. Thank you for that correction.
Sure. Yeah. And so that link's in the chat. You can look at that. If you Google restorative justice or transformative justice in your area, you might find some organizations that are starting out or already working in that. So that's a great way to go. Transformative justice is essentially the same thing as restorative justice, but it's not connected to the justice system or the legal system. That it's a similar process, but kind of doing it in a community-led space.
Cool. And on your website, on the RAWtools website, we've got a few other resources too, right? That different ways people can create conversations around this and follow up. Anything else that, because you said that the easy work is the actual doing the blacksmith, and the deeper heart work is what we heard from Sharletta tonight. And are there any other ways that, say someone has like an experience that they really want they don't know how to resolve this conflict? Are there any other concrete tools you think that we can point people to?
Yeah, I'm always a fan of starting local, right? See what's in your area first. And then if you really can't find anything, reach out to us. I'm sure we'd be happy to help maybe find something. A lot of the emails on rawtools.org go to myself. You can also connect with Sharletta at coloradocrimesurvivorsnetwork.org. So we'd be happy to help with that. There are, like you said on our website, if just how to have healthy dialogue around the idea of gun violence. There's a resource. It's a free download. You can get a link to that on our website, how to develop a plan to respond to gun violence in your community so that you have that. It's kind of like having that dialogue circle. You have these practices in place. Your faith, even Sharletta mentioned this, that she had 3 years of her faith conditioning her towards forgiveness, that we can start practicing restorative principles outside of a high risk or high impact space, so that if we are put in that position, we have kind of this preemptive training, or this preemptive, our second nature becomes a little different when we make this a regular practice. So it's great to have that concrete resource that can kind of be the steps to resolving a problem, but we also got to kind of build that into our everyday practices as well.
That's a good word. Miss Sharletta, you got any closing words for us? And I was going to ask you, if you feel so moved, you could pray us out of here, but I want to
Okay.
give us any closing wisdom you got. Yeah.
Okay. Now I would say another referral is Beverly Title, and she has the 5 R's, and that goes into the repair, relationship, restoration, all of those things. You can pull her name up as well. She's passed away, God rest her soul, but she put together a book, the 5 R's. And so that Beverly Title would be her name. So she's another resource. That, yes, I would like to say that. So parting words of wisdom. Yeah, I would just say that Mike touched on it. The lifestyle, restorative justice is a lifestyle. And so it is so grace-based. And if we can see the grace that Christ has brought into, that's what restorative justice is. I look at the criminal justice system as the Old Testament, and restorative justice is the New Testament. And so it is so laced with grace, and that it has become a lifestyle in everything that I do. That restorative justice philosophy, and that's how we solve the issues in our families, with the community, marriages. I'm not married, so I can't really speak on that, but yeah. So you that are married, you can say restorative justice works in this, but I know nothing about that. So, so yeah, that's what I would say, that it's a lifestyle. And once you begin, it's kind of like you're experiencing this born again experience when you actually plug into the RJ philosophy. It is a beautiful experience. And when you embark upon it, whether it's training, you can have all the training in the world, but until you actually experience it and watch that outcome, it's really a wonderful work. And so that's what I will end with, that the restorative justice is a lifestyle. And I will take us out in a word of prayer.
We'll receive it. Hallelujah.
All righty. And I would say that that God strengthen each and every one of us as we're learning the tools of grace and restorative justice in our lives and abroad, and that we become a voice and instrumental in this work to restore and repair lives, in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank y'all so much. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.